You ever have someone take something from you that you built with your own hands, then stand there smiling while they destroyed it? Not just any something, not something replaceable. I'm talking about something you poured yourself into. Something that carried pieces of your soul, one nail, one beam, one memory at a time. For me, that was my bridge. And for them, it was just in the way. The day it happened started like any other. Fog curling across the lake, the kind of quiet you can feel pressing against your skin, the kind of morning where you think you might just get away with doing nothing but drinking coffee on the porch. But then I heard it, the sound that still makes my stomach tighten even now. It wasn't the slow, steady hum of a lawnmower. It wasn't the muffled buzz of a chainsaw from a neighbor's yard. No, this was sharp, vicious, and close. It echoed off the water like a warning. I didn't even put shoes on. I ran, heart-pounding, gravel biting into my feet as I rounded the corner toward the shoreline. And that's when I saw them. 4 men in bright orange vests, hard hats tilted low, tearing into my bridge with saws and crowbars like it was scrap wood they'd found behind a dumpster. Oh, one guy was knee-deep in the water, sawing through the supports. Another yanked out planks and tossed them into a growing pile on the bank. My voice cracked, half rage, half disbelief. What the hell do you think you're doing? The man closest to me didn't even slow down. He just pointed up the hill toward the road. I followed his finger, and there he was, HOA president. Mark Reynolds, starched polo shirt, sunglasses, clipboard under one arm, arms crossed like a general surveying the battlefield he'd already conquered, the look on his face, and never forget it. That smug, satisfied smirk, like he'd been waiting for this moment for months. I stormed up the hill, my feet slapping against the wet earth. Mark, you better start explaining yourself. This bridge is a violation, he said, without even looking me in the eye. Unauthorized construction on common property. The board voted for its removal. Common property? I laughed, a short, humorless sound. This is my shoreline, my dock, my materials. You've got no right, he cut me off with a shrug. The right is in the bylaws, you should have read them. That's the thing about HOA bylaws. They're written like a foreign language, designed to trip you up, to make you feel like you're always one step away from breaking a rule you didn't even know existed. And Mark knew exactly how to use them. By the time I got back down to the shore, they'd already cut through the main beams. The bridge groaned like a wounded animal before collapsing into the water with a splash that soaked my legs. The sound of the wood snapping was like bones breaking. I just stood there numb. Watching the pieces float away felt like watching parts of my life drift out of reach. That bridge wasn't just a walkway, it was where my kids learned to fish, where I'd sat with my father on summer nights, where I'd stood alone watching the sunrise after my divorce, telling myself I was still capable of building something. From nothing now. It was gone. They hauled the debris into the back of a flatbed truck, tossed a few muddy footprints into the earth where it had stood, drove off like it was just another Tuesday. That night, I sat at my kitchen table staring at the empty shoreline through the window. My coffee went cold hours ago. The house was silent except for the low hum of the refrigerator. My mind kept looping through the same images. Mark's smirk, the saw cutting through the supports, the bridge sinking into the water. I don't know when the numbness turned into anger, but when it did, it was like someone had poured gasoline on a flame. I started pulling out the HOA documents, the ones most people keep in a drawer and never look at unless they're selling their house. I read every page, I made notes, I circled things. I highlighted every clause that felt wrong. And then I started digging deeper. One went through county property records. I looked up corporate filings. I traced every asset they owned and every liability they tried to hide. That's when I found it. The detail they probably didn't think anyone would care enough to notice. The entire identity of this HOA wasn't just the neighborhood, it was the waterfront. Those $7 million homes lined up along the lakefront, gleaming in the sunlight like a postcard. Every real estate listing bragged about exclusive water access. They hosted regattas, paddleboard races, even lakeside concerts. Without the lake, they were just overpriced boxes on dirt. But here's the thing. The HOA didn't own the lake. It managed access to it, sure. But the water itself, that was controlled by the dam. And the dam? That wasn't theirs either. It took me weeks of digging to find the name. An elderly man 2 states away, living in a weathered little farmhouse surrounded by fields. He owned the dam outright. From what I could tell, he'd been trying to sell it for years. But no one wanted to deal with the maintenance costs. I called him first. He didn't answer, so I drove out there. The trip took half a day, Highway 2 back roads to gravel paths that rattled my teeth. When I pulled up, the house looked like it had been standing since before the Civil War, paint peeling, shutters hanging. By a single hinge. He met me at the door in a faded flannel shirt, looking like he had just stepped out of a different century. I told him who I was. I told him what had happened. He listened without interrupting, just nodding slowly. His eyes narrowing when I mentioned the HOA. "They've been a thorn in my side for decades," he finally said. "Tried to push me out once. Told me I was holding back their development plans. I told him where they could shove it." We sat at his kitchen table, the air smelling faintly of dust and coffee that had been brewed hours ago. I made him an offer. Wasn't a fortune, but it was fair. He leaned back, tapping his fingers on the table. "You buy it, you take on the maintenance, you deal with the inspections, you deal with the repairs." "I'll deal with it," I said. He stared at me for a long time. Then slowly he smiled. "It's yours." Just like that, I owned the one thing that could bring their kingdom to its knees. I didn't tell a soul, not my neighbors, not my friends, definitely not the HOA. I wanted them to feel safe. I wanted them to keep smiling. I wanted them to believe. I was still licking my wounds, and then, when the time was right, I shut the gates.
The thing about water is, people think it's always going to be there. They look at a lake and see permanence, something eternal, unshakable. They forget that it's alive, that it moves, that it can vanish as quickly as it comes. When I closed those gates, the change wasn't immediate. For the first day, nothing looked different. Boats still bobbed gently against their docks. The sunlight still sparkled across the ripples. Kids still paddled in neon kayaks. But I knew the clock had started ticking. By day 3, the shoreline had pulled back just enough for a few of the more observant homeowners to notice. You could see a strip of wet sand where there'd been water before, a pale scar around the edges of the lake. The first call came that afternoon. Unknown number. I let it go to voicemail. Hey, I don't know if you've noticed, but the water level's kinda low. Is there something going on with the dam? I smiled, set my phone down, and went back to fixing the hinge on my shed door. By the end of the week, the strip of sand had become a muddy slope, and the docks no longer floated. They sat awkwardly on the ground, tilted like broken legs. The HOA started sending out email blasts with the subject line, "Lake Maintenance Update." They claimed it was just a temporary issue, that the dam operator was performing standard seasonal adjustments. The lies bought them a little time, but not much. Week 2, the smell started. It's not overpowering yet, just a faint sourness that drifted across the breeze in the afternoons. Fish were moving deeper, away from the receding water, in the shallow. Coves were turning stagnant. The glossy magazine perfect photos and the real estate listings didn't match the reality anymore. That's when Mark showed up at my door. He didn't knock like a man coming to apologize. He knocked like a debt collector. 3 sharp raps, impatient, like the house itself owed him something. I opened the door slowly. "Mark, we need to talk," he said, stepping forward like he owned the threshold. "I don't recall inviting you in," I said, blocking the doorway. His jaw tightened. "You're the one who bought the dam." I raised an eyebrow. Word travels fast. "It's not a joke," he snapped. "You're responsible for maintaining the lake level." "Wait. You don't open those gates? You're in violation of what?" I cut in. "Of the HOA's demands. Your bylaws don't apply to me, Mark. I'm not part of your kingdom." His eyes narrowed. "You're hurting everyone in this community. Do you have any idea what this is doing to property values?" "I have an idea," I said, letting the words hang in the air. "The same way you had an idea of what tearing down my bridge would do to me." For a second I saw it, the flicker of guilt, or maybe recognition. But it was gone just as fast, replaced by that familiar condescension. "This isn't about you anymore. It's about the neighborhood." I stepped back, just enough to let the silent stretch. "Then maybe you should have thought about the neighborhood before you messed with me." I closed the door. By the end of the month, the lake looked wrong. It wasn't picturesque anymore. It was a wide, muddy basin, with boats stranded on dry land like beached whales. The yacht club canceled events. Homeowners who'd once thrown lavish parties by the water now kept their blinds closed. And then the media got wind of it. It started with a local paper running a piece titled, "Vanishing Lake Leaves, $1 million Homes High and Dry." Photos were brutal, cracked earth where the water used to be. A row of paddleboards leaning sadly against a fence. An empty dock surrounded by weeds. That article was shared on Facebook, then picked up by the regional news. Soon, reporters were showing up with cameras, asking uncomfortable questions about who controlled the dam and why the gates were closed. I didn't give interviews. I didn't need to. Every time Mark or one of his board members tried to explain they tied themselves in knots. They couldn't blame seasonal adjustments anymore. They couldn't claim maintenance delays. And they sure as hell couldn't admit the truth that they'd made an enemy who now held the most important piece of their precious lake. Behind the scenes, I kept getting calls. Some were polite, some less so. Few homeowners begged me to reconsider. One woman actually cried on the phone, telling me how her family had been saving for a house on the lake for years, and now it was worthless. I listened. I didn't gloat. I told her I was sorry for her, truly, but I didn't open the gates. Because every time I thought about giving in, I saw my bridge collapsing into the water again. I heard the saws. I saw Mark smirk. And I remembered that they'd made me feel powerless. And now, they were learning what that felt like. The second month brought more than just bad press. The smell had gotten worse. Algae bloomed in the stagnant shallows, turning the edges of the water an ugly, sickly green.
Ow.
Dead fish washed up on the cracked shoreline. Mosquitoes thrived in the warm, shallow pools. The HOA's budget started bleeding. They'd built their financial plans on the assumption that the lake was a draw, that people would pay high dues to live here. Now, with houses losing value and potential buyers backing out of deals, they were scrambling to cover basic costs. I heard they'd even considered suing me. The problem was, I wasn't breaking any laws. The dam was mine. The water flow was mine to manage, and no contract tied me to their needs. Mark tried again. This time he brought 2 other board members. Both in pressed suits like they were about to negotiate a corporate merger. "We can work this out," one of them said, trying to keep his tone even. "Name your price." I leaned back in my chair. My price. Interesting. Was there a price for my bridge? "That's not the same thing," Mark said through gritted teeth. "It's exactly the same thing," I replied. "You took something from me because you thought you could. Now I'm returning the favor." "You're going to bankrupt families," the other man said. "I didn't take their money," I said quietly. "You did. When you decided to pick a fight you couldn't win." They left without shaking my hand. By month 3, the lake was a ghost of itself. The central basin was now a shallow pond surrounded by acres of dry, cracked mud. The yacht club building, once a place of champagne, toasts and gala dinners, sat eerily quiet. Someone spray-painted open the gates on the side of their pristine white boathouse. Real estate signs popped up like weeds. Some homeowners tried to sell before prices dropped further, but most couldn't find a buyer at any price that would cover their mortgage. The local news started referring to it as the drained lake scandal. It wasn't just their wallets that were hurting, it was their pride. This neighborhood had been their crown jewel, their proof that they were living. The dream. Now every time someone drove past, they saw a drained lake bed and thought of failure. I kept to myself. I worked in my yard, fixed my shed, planted a garden. Sometimes I'd walk down to the shoreline and stand where my bridge used to be, looking. Out at the empty stretch of earth didn't bring me joy exactly, but it did bring me peace. And then, one evening, I got a letter, hand-delivered, no return address. I unfolded it at the kitchen table. The handwriting was careful almost. Formal. "You've made your point. We're ready to discuss terms."
The letter sat on the table all night. I didn't even try to sleep. I just kept looking at it, the way the writer had been careful with their words. "We're ready to discuss terms." Not an apology, not an admission of fault. Just a signal that they were finally starting to feel the walls close in. I didn't rush to answer. I wanted them to sweat. 3 days later, Mark showed up again. No board members this time, no suits, no clipboard. He looked tired. Not just a little worn around the edges, but hollow-eyed, like he'd been carrying something heavier than his ego for a while now. "We can't keep going like this," he said, skipping the small talk. I leaned against my doorframe. "You figured that out just now? This is serious," he said. "Yeah, people are talking about suing the HOA. Some are threatening to stop paying dues entirely." We've got maintenance we can't afford, landscaping companies walking off the job. And you still haven't apologized, I said, cutting him off. His jaw tightened. You want me to grovel? Is that what this is about? I shrugged. It's about respect, Mark. Something you never showed me. He stared at me for a long time, like he was trying to decide whether to swallow his pride or let it choke him. Finally, he said, I'll meet with you, anywhere you want. Let's talk! We agreed on neutral ground, a small diner off the highway, the kind of place with faded red booths and a waitress who calls everyone hun. When I got there, he was already sitting in a corner booth nursing a coffee. He slid a folder across the table without saying a word. Inside was an agreement. If I opened the dam, the HOA would pay me a maintenance fee every year. It wasn't a small amount, enough to make most people seriously consider it. I closed the folder and pushed it back to him. No. His eyes flickered. No, you haven't even made a counteroffer. This isn't about money, I said. Everything's about money, he snapped. Not this, I said quietly. This is about the fact that you thought you could take what you wanted from me and walk away without consequences? He leaned forward. So what? You're going to drain the lake forever. You think the county's just going to let you? I've had 3 months to try, I said, and here we are. The waitress came by, topped off my coffee, and left without asking if we wanted food. I think she could feel the tension. In the air, Mark sat back, running a hand over his face. People hate you, you know? I smiled faintly. Funny, they didn't seem to care much about me before. That bridge was illegal, he said, his voice low. That bridge was mine, I said, my voice lower. We sat in silence for a while. He finally stood, leaving a crumpled 20 on the table. This isn't over, he said. I watched him walk out to his car, and I knew he still didn't get it. The next few weeks were interesting. The HOA started trying to fix the situation without me. They called in consultants. They talked to contractors about dredging parts of the lake bed to make it look better, even without water. They organized community improvement days to distract homeowners from the real issue. But every photo, every drone shot, every social media post still showed the truth. An empty lake. One afternoon, I was working on my fence when a black SUV pulled up. A man in a suit stepped out, introduced himself as an attorney representing interested parties. Are you willing to sell the dam? He asked. Depends who's asking, I said. My clients prefer to remain anonymous. Then I prefer to remain uninterested, I replied, turning back to my fence. He left a business card on my mailbox. I threw it away. By month 5, desperation had set in. Homeowners who'd once ignored me now approached me in the grocery store, in the post office, even while I was pumping gas. Some begged, some cursed. Some offered money under the table. I listened to every one of them, because deep down I wanted them to understand something. This wasn't a tantrum. This was justice. And then one morning, I woke up to the sound of engines near the dam. I drove down, my gut tight. Sure enough, there was a crew, trucks, equipment, a couple of guys in work boots unloading tools. At the edge of it all, Mark stood with a clipboard talking to a man in a county jacket. I parked, got out, and walked straight toward them. Morning, I said. The county guy turned to me. We're here to inspect the dam. That's fine, I said. I'll unlock the gate for you. I led them through, watched them do their checks, listened to them talk about flow rates and structural integrity. When they were done, they handed me a report that said exactly what I already knew. The dam was in perfect working condition. Mark's face when he read it was priceless. They can't make you open it, the county guy said, shaking my hand. Before he left, it's your call. When they were gone, Mark just stood there, staring at the dry expanse that used to be his HOA's crown jewel. Why are you doing this? He asked finally, his voice quieter than I'd ever heard it, because... You taught me how, I said. He didn't respond. He just walked away. By month 6, the HOA was a shadow of itself. Half the board had resigned. Dues payments were down 40%. Vendors refused to sign contracts without guaranteed payment up front. The community newsletter, once a glossy bread sheet, now looked like it had been printed at home on a dying inkjet printer. And the lake was just a memory. I drive past sometimes. Not because I needed to, but because I wanted to see it with my own eyes. The cracked earth. The stranded boats, the weeds reclaiming the shoreline. It was a reminder that power isn't always about money or titles. Sometimes it's about patience. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted everything in gold, I walked down to the base of the dam. I put my hand on the metal gate, feeling the cool vibration of the water pressing against it from the other. Sighed. It would take one motion to open it, to let the lake rush back, to give them everything they'd lost. But I didn't, because they hadn't lost enough yet. It's strange the way people adapt. At first, the drained lake was a shock, a wound they couldn't stop staring at. But after months, the homeowners began to live around it. They stopped talking about when the water comes back and started saying, remember when? They built fences to block the view. They planted fast-growing shrubs. A few even put up privacy screens on their decks, but no amount of landscaping could hide the smell, or the dust that blew off the dry bed in summer winds, or the cracks spreading in the empty earth like veins. I thought maybe they'd fade in too. Quiet resignation. I thought maybe they'd finally learn that some fights aren't worth picking. But the HOA wasn't ready to die quietly. It started with little things, flyers and mailboxes about community unity. Meetings where the main agenda item was restoring the lake. But then they started getting bolder. I heard rumors they were talking to state officials, looking for any angle to force the gates open. One night, I got a call from a friend who still lived inside the HOA boundaries. They're planning something, he said. I don't know what, but it's not going to be pretty. 2 weeks later, I found out what he meant. It was just after midnight when my dog started barking. I looked out the window and saw headlights cutting through the darkness near the dam. It's not just one set, several. I grabbed my flashlight and headed down, heart pounding. When I got close, I saw them, half a dozen men. 2 pickup trucks, a generator, and what looked like industrial cutting equipment. They were trying to get the damn gate open themselves. What the hell do you think you're doing? I shouted, my voice echoing across the water. They froze for a second. Then one of them, a tall guy in a ball cap, stepped forward. You can't keep it closed forever. We're taking back what's ours. I laughed, though there was no humor in it. Funny. I don't remember you paying for this dam. One of the men revved the generator. Sparks lit the night as they brought a cutting torch to the gate's lock. I pulled out my phone. You've got about 30 seconds before the sheriff gets here, I said. They hesitated, looking at each other. A couple backed away, but the guy in the ball cap stood his ground. You think you're untouchable? You're not. Sooner or later you'll slip, maybe, I said, but not tonight. The sound of sirens in the distance finally broke them. They scattered, jumping into trucks, tires spitting gravel as they tore off into the night. By the time the deputies arrived, it was quiet again. I filed a report. Not because I thought they'd catch anyone, but because I wanted it on record. I wanted the HOA to know that if they wanted to play dirty, I could too. After that, the tension changed. It wasn't just about the lake anymore. It was personal. A chess game where every move was about more than just the pieces on the board. The HOA tried legal threats again. They sent letters from new attorneys, hoping a different letterhead might scare me. They floated offers through intermediaries. They even suggested shared management of the dam, as if I'd let them anywhere near it. And all the while, the lake bed stayed dry. The weeds grew taller. Smell got worse. Then came the summer storm. It rolled in one afternoon, black clouds boiling over the horizon, lightning slicing the sky. By nightfall, the rain was pounding so hard it rattled the windows. I stood on my porch and watched the runoff stream toward the dam. By morning, the reservoir side was swelling, the highest I'd seen it since I bought the place. The gates held, but I knew the pressure was immense. That's when I got the idea. Called the local news station. Told them they might want to be at the dam that afternoon. Told them something big was about to happen. When they arrived, cameras in hand, so did the HOA board. Mark was there, looking like a man who'd been dragged to his own execution. I walked to the gate controls. The rain still dripping from my jacket. The cameras were rolling. You wanted the lake back? I said, my voice carrying over the murmurs of the crowd. Here's the deal. You admit, right here, what you did to me. You admit you tore down my bridge without cause. You admit you treated me like I didn't matter. Mark's jaw clenched. You think I'm going to humiliate myself on camera? I shrugged. Then you can keep your lake bed. There was a long pause. The board members whispered to each other. Finally, Mark stepped forward. Fine, he said, loud enough for the cameras. We tore down your bridge. We overstepped. We were wrong. It wasn't poetic. It wasn't heartfelt. But it was public. It was enough. I turned the wheel. The gates creaked, then groaned, then the water surged forward in a roaring cascade. The crowd gasped as it poured into the empty basin, churning mud into foam. It would take days to refill. But the lake was coming back. The HOA tried to spin it later, of course. Tried to say the restoration was always part of the plan. But the video of Mark's statement went viral, not because of what he said, but because of the way he looked saying it. Defeated. Small dot. In the weeks that followed, the water rose inch by inch. Boats returned to the docks. The smell faded. Real estate agents started smiling again. Life went back to normal. But it wasn't really normal, not for them. Not for me, because every time Mark saw me, every time one of those homeowners passed me in town, they remembered that for half a year I held their lake in my hands. I could do it again any time I wanted. And that's a kind of power no by law can touch.